Welcome to the April 7th, 2025 episode of the Energy Show. I'm journalist Markham Hislop, and the working title for today's show is Pierre Poilievre and the Masters of His Universe. This show started out as an interview with Canadian author Mark Burry, and he's written a book called Ripper, and it's very, very good. And we did 45 minutes of a very delightful interview, and it turned out we had a problem with Zoom, and there were technical issues with the video file, and we couldn't use it. So I thought, well, that's okay. I've read parts of most of the book, and I've interviewed Mark, and I'll review the book, and that'll be great. And then late last week, I got a number of emails because frankly, the energy show has taken off. I mean, we're generating very, very large numbers, 700,000 viewers a month, which is in Canadian context very large. And we're starting to get a lot of comments from viewers like yourself. And there were a number from Eastern Canada, in particular one from Quebec. And this gentleman said, what is it about Alberta? Why are they so angry? Why do they want to separate? He said, I don't understand. Please explain it to me. And that got me thinking about Burry's book because as good as it is, and I have to tell you, I've written a couple of books myself, and writing in a narrative style that's entertaining, draws you in, gives you information without hitting you over. That's very difficult. It's a gift, trust me, because my style is not like that. If you've read any of my columns or maybe even one of my books, you know that I like to marshal my evidence, get my facts, and then write tight prose and make an argument. It gets a little dry. I get it. It's my style. But Burry's not like that. This is a popular style, but he's a historian. I think he's got a PhD in law, or maybe it's a PhD in history, and he's also got a law degree as a practicing lawyer, and it's just very well written. And one of the points that he makes about Poilievre is that he never really hasn't changed. I mean, the boy that he was growing up in Calgary, where he first came to the attention of the Conservative Party there, and Jason Kenney, former MP, and then short-lived premier from 2019 to 2022, noticed him. He was prominent in the media. We'd write letters to the editor, that sort of thing. And he was very aggressive and he presented himself well. He worked in the call centers, selling memberships, getting people out for campaigns, that sort of thing. He was very effective at it. That kind of talent, when you can persuade people, that'll attract attention of other politicians. And so Kenny and others took him under their wing, and they got him elected in 2004. He spent, or maybe it was the election of 2000. Anyways, I think he's been in the member of parliament for 24 years. I guess that would be 2000. And one of the things that occurs to me, and so there's a lot of Eastern Canadian writers spend a lot of time with the character of the man. They don't often meet people who are this got a big chip on their shoulder. So Burry writes about that quite a bit, and then I found Paul Wells, who's a veteran Canadian journalist, and he's based out of Ottawa now, and he's written for decades about Canadian politics. And he wrote a piece for the Walrus, very good online magazine, and it's titled "Why Poilievre is Always Looking for a Fight," and the subtitle is "The Man Who Plans to Become Prime Minister by Making Enemies," and that I think probably pretty much sums him up. This is an interesting little insight from Wells. So I'll read it to you. In public, he says that Poilievre was a very polite, courteous, warm, and so on whenever they met. But, end quote, in public, it was often a different story. He can be belligerent, pompous, contemptuous of politicians from other parties. Anyone interviewing Poilievre had the disorienting and not entirely pleasant sensation of watching the private man disappear for a few minutes while a persona came out to speak. that really caught my attention because I first moved to Calgary in 2000. We moved away in 2010, but my daughter, my grandkids are there, my all my friends are there, my network. Calgary's my home base when I'm away from British Columbia, and I go back to Alberta probably at least 4 to 6 times a year, and often in the past have done more than that. So Calgary's like, was my home and is a second home. In fact, we launched the predecessor to Energy Media in Southeast Calgary in 2008. Been around 17 years or almost 17 years. So I know Calgary very well. And here's what I can tell you. Uh, I've never met Pierre Poilievre, never talked to him, never interviewed him, uh, but I know him. Why do I know him? Because I know hundreds of Calgarians who were just like him. There's a political tribe in Calgary tightly tied to the oil and gas industry, and they are he's a member of that tribe, and they're just like him. They could be charming people. I've had coffee with them and beers with them and lunch with them and so on, spent time with them, but as soon as the issue of politics comes up, they are nasty as a medicine hat rattlesnake, and they're very aggressive, and they don't listen to you. This is not a conversation. They are there to convince you of the rightness of their position. So I know Pierre Poilievre. And I'll probably I'm going in a couple of weeks. I'll be back in Calgary, and I'm sure I'll run into a bunch of them. And I'll. But here's the point. I thought if I'm going to talk about, Mark Burry's book, and you really should read it. It's worth the buy, and especially because we're for non-Canadian viewers, we're in a national election, and Pierre Poilievre is the leader of the Canadian Conservative Party, and for a long time, since 2022, he's led in the polls. We thought he was a shoo-in to be prime minister. Now it turns out that Mark Carney and the Liberals in most polls have pulled ahead. And Poilievre's numbers are one of the reasons. I mean, he is, I was just reading an Angus Reid poll, and his likability numbers are in the toilet. And they've always been in the toilet. People don't like him. They don't even agree with him, like his policies. He didn't have any. It's all about the fact that they were tired with Justin Trudeau, who had been prime minister from 2015 until January. And so then he stepped down. Mark Carney, the central banker and climate financier, won the leadership, which makes him automatically the prime minister. And Bob's your uncle. The polls shifted, and now we've never seen anything like it. In 2 months, the Poilievre is now trailing badly, and Carney, it looks like he's a number one with a bullet, as they used to say about radio hits, and so that's where we're at now. But he could, I mean, this is still got 3 weeks in the campaign, and many election campaigns have been lost, closer to the E-Day than this. But I wanted to offer you something that wasn't in Burry's book, that wasn't in the work that I read of Paul Wells and other Eastern Canadian writers, because they just don't get Alberta. They just don't. And I've been covering the oil and gas industry there for a while, and I think I've got an insight here that will go a long way to explaining why Albertans are so angry and why Poilievre got a big chip on his shoulder. So here's my hypothesis. First thing need to know, and I'm just going to get some of my numbers up here so that I can make sure that I'm accurate. The first thing you need to know is when former Prime Minister Stephen Harper said in 2009, Canada needs to be an energy superpower. Canada's already an energy superpower. Trust me on this. Canada is the fourth largest oil producer in the world, behind the U.S. at number one. Then Russia and Saudi Arabia are around 9 million barrels a day at number 2 and 3, and Canada comes in at 5.3 million barrels a day at number 4. And we're the fifth largest gas producer in the world. And as it turns out, just last month, the Alberta government got a reserve study, and it turns out that there are There's more than 5 times as much natural gas in the area. I think this is in Western Canada, as opposed to just Alberta, but I could be wrong on that. But anyway, 5 times more gas than they previously thought, and now Canada basically leapfrogged from 13th place in the world to ninth place in the reserves. And it has, I think it's maybe second in terms of oil reserves, which now are 167 billion barrels. And they're almost all, most of them anyway, are up in the oil sands in northern Alberta. The current resource in the ground is like 1.8 trillion. So this is really important because it's how Albertans see themselves. They see themselves as, and this, we're talking about the oil and gas leaders, the Alberta, especially the conservative politicians and Premier Danielle Smith. They see themselves as at the same, their peers of the Americans and the Russians and the Saudis when it comes to energy. They don't see themselves as a lesser player. And what they want more than anything is they want to exploit these tremendous hydrocarbon resources, and they want to be Saudi Arabia. They want to be Russia. They want to be at that level. And Premier Danielle Smith for the past year has said, we will double our oil production. So if they doubled their oil production, that would take them up to another 4 million barrels. So total in Canada would be about 9.5. They would be the equivalent of Saudi Arabia and Russia. Imagine the wealth that would be created. Imagine the power that would accrue to Alberta if that were to happen. And when I said in the title, his masters of the universe, what I mean is that the oil and gas CEOs, the boosters, the trade associations, they see themselves as masters of the universe. And the problem is that Alberta has been frustrated. So if you look at the United States, most of its oil, like in Texas, for example, they have a coast. They don't have to ask the federal government if they want to build a pipeline over to the coast. They just build it. And there are pipelines, of course, like, North Dakota is landlocked, and there are other places like in the Rocky Mountains, but those are relatively small producers compared to, Texas. And then there's California, which of course has a coast. So the United States can get its product to market using pipelines and its coastal resources. Saudi Arabia and Russia have absolutely no trouble. They're autocratic governments. If the government decides that they want to build a port and ship oil out of it, who's going to argue? So that gets done. Canada, amongst the four of them, Alberta is the lone producer that is landlocked and frustrated by other governments. So you look at Trans Mountain expansion, the city of Burnaby harassed the project until Kinder Morgan left, and the federal government had to buy it and build it. The province of British Columbia sued them. It's Indigenous groups opposed, local activists and local citizens opposed. It was, Albertans look at that and they think, oil and gas production is my birthright. If we have those resources, we have a right to get them to market and sell them and make money and enjoy the kind of, they've had the highest per capita average incomes in Canada for decades. And they're proud of it. And they want more of it, as much as they can get. And if it's not British Columbia frustrating them, it's Quebec and in particular Ontario and the federal government, which is in Ottawa, which is in Ontario. And so it doesn't matter that the Liberals, bought them a pipeline for $34 billion. It then approved another pipeline expansion at Line 3 and approved LNG projects and improved. None of that matters. The important thing is Albertans didn't get everything they were capable of getting, everything they wanted. And I want to read something This came from the March 18th open letter from 14 oil and gas CEOs, 10 producers, and 4 pipeline companies. And I've dealt with this in a couple of shows because it has a reference to using all available emergency powers of the federal government to make sure that infrastructure, meaning mostly pipelines, gets built so that Alberta can ship more of its product off the coast and get it out to Asia and to a lesser extent Europe. Basically, what they're saying, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you do when you have a pandemic. You use the Emergency Act. When we had, the convoy occupying Ottawa in early 2022, you use the Emergency Act. It's an emergency. That's what it's for. Alberta getting its oil and gas to the coast is by any objective measure not an emergency and shouldn't be the justification for trampling on Canadians' rights to oppose projects in their backyard and just by have them trampled over by the federal government to please Alberta. That's wrong. I mean, there's no way that we should, but that's the way Alberta thinks. It thinks that their right to get that product to market and to make money at it, to expand their wealth and power, trumps other rights of other provinces, rights of other citizens. Because they're really frustrated. They're angry that they've been circumscribed all these decades. And here is this letter. Here's what it says. Of the 5 things that the CEOs are asking of the federal government, this is, I think it's number 3 or 4. Anyway, grow production. The federal government's unlegislated cap on emissions must be eliminated to allow the sector to reach its full potential. That's the key phrase, to allow the sector to reach its full potential. Now, we've already talked about how Danielle Smith wants to double oil production, but there's another layer in this particular onion, and that is everybody in Alberta, remotely connected to the oil and gas industry, including the regulator, the premier and her government, the trade associations, the business community, and the oil and gas industry, believes in OPEC's vision of the oil and gas future. And I've mentioned this in other shows as well. OPEC has modeled, they've got 2 reports, World Oil Outlook 2045 and 2050. And they model that by 2050, oil demand is going to increase from 1.3 million barrels a day today to 120 million barrels a day by 2050. And it won't be a sharp drop off after that. Oil is going to be around at that level for a long time, according to OPEC. And what that means is where the International Energy Agency says the age of oil is dead, the age of electricity is beginning, the Albertans think the age of oil has just begun. This is the golden age of oil. And by being frustrated, not being able to build pipelines, not being able to build infrastructure, they see their peers growing and growing production and doing very well, while from their point of view, they're stunted. Their ambitions are stunted, their production is stunted, and it's incredibly frustrating. Incredibly frustrating. And I've sat across from executives, I've sat across from people in the oil and gas industry. I've seen the anger and frustration on their face. And I get it. I get it. You're landlocked. You have to rely on other provinces, the federal government, to do what needs to be done to get your product to market. They won't do it, or they only take half-hearted measures from your point of view, and it infuriates. They're infuriated. That's a real problem. And when I should mention that when Donald Trump promised to impose tariffs after he was sworn in on January 20th, and he said he would do it, and there was a big reaction in Canada, the first thing that the industry and its supporters did was demand pipelines and LNG projects and expansion of the oil sands and on and on. That's it. The problem is, of course, that all they're doing is saying, okay, well, we don't want to sell to the US anymore, or we need another markets in case they close off the border entirely. And so all we want to do is exactly what we've been doing for 100 years, and we just want to do it somewhere else. We want to sell to Asia. We want to sell to Europe. And that's enough for us. We don't have to think beyond that. And I would argue, and I have argued for years now, that the way to relieve Alberta's frustrations is not to give them pipelines so they can sell oil to refineries elsewhere. It's to do something else with the resource, add value to the resource. And in this case, if you've heard me say this, you've heard me say it dozens of times, and that is the Alberta, its innovation agency, Alberta Innovates, is a year or so away from having a commercial process to turn bitumen into carbon fiber precursor, which would then be the basis for a carbon fiber industry in Alberta. And that's not the only material. You do asphalt binder, which is used to make roads, activated carbon, and gets used in batteries and other products. And I'm told by the scientists at Alberta Innovates, it could be, this is just what they've had resources to research. There's lots of other applications. They just have to, they need the resources to do the work. So my point here is that we need some out of the box thinking, folks. So Albertans could, instead of looking at international markets, they could build their own domestic markets. The oil sands would still continue to produce, though it would have to fix its environmental problems, and that's grist for a whole nother show. Trust me, it's a nightmare up there. And it would have to lower its emissions from its production, which are incredibly high for many of the projects up there. Those are two preconditions for the oil sands to have any kind of extended life. Nevertheless, assuming that those could be taken care of, and they can, by the way, then you could foresee a future for Alberta where the oil sands, the bitumen that it produces, instead of being put in the pipeline and sent, thousands of kilometers away, just goes down to Edmonton to factories there, and they turn out carbon fiber, and then that's what gets sold internationally into Asia and Europe and Africa and Latin America, wherever else wants it. There are solutions to this. There doesn't need to be frustration. We need to think outside the box, have different strategies, take different approaches than the ones we have. So Mark Burray did an excellent job describing Pierre Poilievre's background, his character, some of the issues that he's become involved with, like his backing for the 2022 convoy, the occupation of Ottawa for 3 weeks. He was out taking them, muffins and donuts and coffee. He's kind of flirted a little bit with some of the far right, the white supremacists. And really, I have a quote here from Danielle Smith, where she says, and she said this on a Breitbart podcast. She basically said that Donald Trump, everybody would in the MAGA movement in the States would like the new direction of a Poilievre conservative government, would be very aligned with the direction that America is going. Basically, what she was saying was, you've got Trump, you got the MAGA movement, and Pierre Poilievre and the conservative government are lined up with that. And that's been actually a big drag on his public polling numbers. It got a lot of play in the media up here. So Burry does a good job of describing all of that. And I would recommend that you buy the book. I got mine on Kindle on Amazon, but it's available through Bibliosis is the publisher. And I'm sure their Indigo will have it stocked as well. But I think when you take his analysis of Poilievre and the problems of being a ripper instead of a weaver, so you fight, and it's the politics of division versus the politics of inclusion and strategy and coalitions and so on that characterizes being a weaver. So you take all of that and then you add to it this background on the frustrations that have taken place for a long time in Alberta, I think you get a more rounded understanding, more complete understanding of Pierre Poilievre as the leader, but also many of the people in his caucus who are from Alberta share his view of the world. And in addition to that, Saskatchewan and conservative members in interior BC and in northern Ontario and so on. There's this sense of frustration that the federal government and other provinces have held them back, that there was potential that didn't get realized, economic potential, and that's why they're mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. I think when you combine Brewery and that idea, you get a much more nuanced and complete look into Pierre Poilievre. And I can tell you, I'm going to be doing the same kind of analysis on Mark Carney. He wrote a book, I think it was 2016, called Values. And it's an interesting book. I mean, the guy's got a PhD in economics. It's a little dry, I'm told. And what I've read of it is true, hard to get through. But nevertheless, it's an interesting insight into the leader of the Liberal Party. So until then, and we'll try to get to that this week.
Thanks for watching the show. We are on a mission to reach 10,000 subscribers and over 1 million views. If you're enjoying the content, give us a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for being part of our community.